Hello Quilty friends. Welcome to my sewing room and welcome to my channel. Today my daughter Cassidy is here and she's filming me, and it's all about the Mercantile Sampler Sew Along, and this is my week 1 tutorial. And so this is the Mercantile Sampler. This is the quilt that we'll be making, and it finishes at 88 by 88, so it's a square quilt, and it starts January 29th, Monday, and it goes till April 26th. So it's 13 weeks, and I'm doing 2 blocks per week. Let's see, the first one is always here on my channel, and then the remaining will be on my blog. My blog is called Be in My Bonnet. I always leave a link here within the video description, and so make sure that you click on the entire video description, and so that you can see all of the links and all the information about this sew along, and links to the sew along guide and things like that that you need to know. And so this is the sew along guide here in a binder, and so there is no pattern to purchase. It's just the sew along guide that tells you all about the cutting, the schedule, shows you all the fabric requirements, all of the notion requirements. And then within each fabric, it shows you how much fabric is required for the kit. And like these are all fat eighths right here. It lists at the top here. So you go through, and within each fabric, it tells you how much you need to cut for that fabric. Now, because this is a sampler, we'll also, well, before I go on to that, it also talks to you about where the blocks are placed in the quilt, and the border instructions and things like that. But there's actually kind of 2 sew along guides for this one because it's a sampler and they're all pieced blocks. The only applique is when we turn them into a circle, an applique. And so I wanted to detail each pieced block in the cutting. And so you'll also get that in the second part. Okay, so that's the sew along guide. And I tell you all about it and all about the notions and everything that we need in my blog, in my Be Prepared post that I already did at the first of this month. And of course, I will link to that as well in this video description if you have not, if you've not read that yet and known all about the supplies and all of the details. And I really go into detail about everything and what I'm doing. And so again, all of the sew along tutorials after this will go on my blog on Mondays and Fridays. And so let me talk to you about, here, let me push this out of the way, about the cutting. So this is how I've prepared, and this is what the sew along actually helps you to do so that you can be prepared if you'd like. So this is block 1, and this is how I prepared it. I just cut everything, put each block on a design board so that I can stack them like this on top of each other. I don't know if you can see that whole stack, but there's 25 there, but you can put them in baggies, you can put them in whatever you want to do. I just always have used my design boards, and I keep them stacked up and nothing moves after I've done that. I use these So Handy stickers to label. There's letters, there's all different colors of letters, but there's also numbers. And so I've also went ahead and numbered each block in order as they're going to happen, see? All right, for an example like that. And I've also just copied a picture of the quilt, which you can do. That's when I give you the links to the sew along guide in my Be Prepared post. There's also links there where you can copy off a picture if you want, so you can see a picture in front of you that's larger, or whatever you want to do, the imitation and everything. But I like to take the picture, cut it apart so that I can put the picture of the block on my design board, because I'm a visual person. And so yes, there's names of the blocks and things like that, and you could write those out, but all I need is just the picture of the block. And so it also helps me to see that I've cut everything. I can identify the fabrics and things like that. And so that, I'm just showing you how I cut and prepare. You can cut as you go along. You can do whatever you want as you go along. This is the sew along that I'm hosting, but if you're joining the sew along, it's your sew along and it's your quilt. meaning you can go at the speed that you would like. You can keep up with me if you'd like to and make 2 blocks a week, or you can just watch the tutorials at your own speed. The schedule really is just the schedule that I'm doing the tutorial, so you'll know when to tune into my blog. Again, I'll have links to my blog. If you don't want to come here for the links, just Google search Bee in My Bonnet. For some reason, since Blogger changed years ago, you used to be able to subscribe to my blog and get emails to it, but it doesn't allow you to do that anymore. And we've tried to fix it, and it's just not a possibility anymore. And so all you have to do is either just bookmark my blog or just search Bee in My Bonnet, and it'll come right up. And so no worries about finding my blog. You just need to go there every Monday and Friday according to the schedule. Okay. And so let's see, I've talked about the schedule, talked about the cutting. So I wanted to talk about what I'm going to be showing you today and in the tutorials, which is sewing the blocks. So there's a double meaning for the Mercantile Sampler title. And so how I'm going to explain that is, it's a sampler quilt. A sampler quilt typically means that it's all different blocks. So it's a sampler, a sampling of blocks. But to me, this kind of has a double meaning because I'm going to be showing you a sampler of methods on how to sew the units in the blocks. So I drew all of these blocks to be several different sizes. So they're not all the same finished sizes, so they don't take the same finished segments. I drew them all different sizes so they could fit within the 12-inch circle, and they would look unique and they would look cohesive. And so because there are different unit sizes, we will be working, with several different ones as a result, instead of common unit sizes. Like if they were all 12-inch finished blocks, then would typically be working with 2.5, 3.5, and 1.5 inch squares and things like that. But a lot of these are just very odd finished sizes, not odd shaped, like 8 3/4 or 9.5 or something like that. That is not a typical, traditional block. Like I say, I just drew them all different sizes, and so we're using different segments. And I have rulers and, different kind of methods, some with rulers, some without rulers. And so I'll be showing you that. I just thought it was the perfect opportunity because of this, is to show you different ways that I do different units for different blocks for different reasons. And so I'll be showing you each one, differently in the tutorial, when that is applicable. There's always a lot of different ways to make a quilt block, and I'm sure there's more ways than I'm going to be showing you. I'm just going to show you how I'm making this quilt with a few different sampler methods, okay? And so the first block that we're making today is called Birthday Cake, okay? And all of the blocks are going to finish. I have not trimmed this up yet because I haven't appliqued this yet, and we'll talk about the applique at the end. But we'll trim it up with a 14.5 inch trim-it ruler, and we'll talk about that later too. But all the blocks finish at 14 inches after they're sewn into the quilt, and the circle is 12 inches. And so this is what I'm talking about when we'll be sewing the blocks. No matter what size they are, we add borders on there so that they will go on to the 12-inch circle. And so for this one, we're going to be making half square triangles, and I'm going to show you 2 different ways that are my favorite to make half square triangles. And then, so we're going to go over to the machine here in a minute, and we're going to piece the block, and then we're going to make it into a circle, and then we'll come back here over to the work table, and I'll talk to you about the applique. All right, let's go over to the machine. Okay, I'm going to show you how to make half square triangles, and this is Sweet Baby James that I'm sewing on today. And so the first thing we're going to do is we need 8 of these, all right? And so I'm going to show you how I like to make them. When I have to make matching ones up, I make 2 at the same time, all right? So we take the B in the background and the F, okay? And you can leave these on if you want. They don't leave a residue, but I'm just going to show you what I do. First, I don't have to lay them right on top of each other yet because, well, I'm going to show you one way I do it. So I could take this ruler right here, I'll show you both ways I mark. Okay, I can either use this tall one. I don't let my short one fall down there. Here we go. All right, so I've got a 6.5 and a 12.5, and this is small enough that, you know, I'm just going to use the 12.5. So you can either just take this from point to point and mark a line a 1/2 inch apart there. Okay, that will work, and we'll do that on another square. But on this I'm going to show you how to just use the Seam So Easy guide so you don't have to do that. So here I've got 3 lines that are a 1/4 inch apart already. So I'm going to start on this corner right here following this line so that I'm sewing a 1/4 inch away. Hope that makes sense. So I'm just going to start right here. And I'm following this outside line here. And then I'm just going to grab a little scrap of fabric. Not doing my bonus quilt sewing in between blocks today because of filming. I just want to be able to concentrate on this. And then I flip it around. Okay, so I've got this one seam here, and it's a 1/4 inch away from the corner. And I'm just going to flip it around, and now I've sewn here, and I'm going to do the same thing so that I'm sewing a 1/2 inch away. And when my squares are small enough, I like to do this so that I don't have to take the time to mark them all. But if my squares are larger than comes out here, then I mark them anyway, and that's where this bigger ruler comes in. Okay, so now I'm going to go over here. I've got, I'm going to set that back in there. I'm going to press my seams just to make them nice and flat. Okay. And then you could use your rotary cutter at this point to cut them apart, but I'm comfortable with a pair of scissors in my hand, and I just like to use them. And so you cut them apart. Okay, it doesn't have to be exact. And then we're going to grab this small mat, and for this block, we're going to be using all different sizes throughout the quilt, but for this block, we're going to use this 2 1/4 inch, not the 2.5 inch trim it, but the 2 1/4. Okay, and then I just grab my little mat here, and let me see which side you can see the best. See the stitching line right here? I'm going to line the stitching line up with this corner line this way. So basically it's from corner to corner. Can you see that? Mm-hmm. Maybe I should have used some colored thread. I don't know. And then I'm just going to trim around here. Now, I could open this up, press the seams open, and then trim all around. But I find this easier and more accurate. I don't have to, be that fussy about that. This is how you're going to get the exact size, and that's why I have you cut these a little bit bigger so that you can get 2 out. So that's what that looks like. I'm going to hurry and do the other one. Let me just turn the mat around so I can put it right on that stitching line. And I just push down. My little rulers have these little non-slip on them. Everything that you see that's aqua is a non-slip on the underside. And so that helps. And I'm just pushing down so that when I rotate my mat, it doesn't shift anything. Okay. And I can just take these over to the little garbage can, set that back over there. And then I've already set the seam, so what I'm going to do is just open these up. And I just want them opened up all the way, but I'm going to try not to stretch them or anything out like that. I'm just going to make sure that I use the tip of that iron to open it up. I can use my seam roller at this point if I wanted to, but I usually, will use that during the intersections. But let me show you what I mean with that. This is flat and it's not curved, and so a lot of times I'll just roll over the seams to make sure it's open all the way and there's not any little pleats in there. So I'm just going to set that up there, put a nice hot iron on it. Try not to iron back and forth. I'm just pressing, and then I'll put a clapper on there, maybe a couple, and that's going to cool down. And then I have 8 of those, perfectly sized, exactly what we need. So right now, after we trimmed it up, they measure 2 1/4. And when they go into the quilt, they'll measure 1 3/4 inch finished into the quilt. So there's that one. And so because I needed 8 of those, we just needed to cut 4 of each ones. Now on this one, we're going to do this one next because I'm going to do it exactly the same way because I need 2 half square triangles of those. And you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate this. Well, I don't know if I can, that doesn't really help to rotate it. But we're sewing, let me do it this way. All right, hopefully that won't fall off. So it's upright when we put it into the quilt after we've turned it into a circle. We can pivot it, but we're sewing the block this way. Does that make sense? So now we're going to make 2 half square triangles, pink in the background. So because we need 2 of those, then we're going to sew it the exact same way. And so we're going to use the D and the A. And I'll just take that A and stick it back over there. And so I could do it the same way without marking it, but because the corner comes clear out here for my Seam So Easy, I usually just, this is where I grab my pencil. And what I do is I just mark it that way. I'm going to do it right here so it's not on an even surface. And I just line up the lines here from corner to corner. And then I'm just marking a 1/2 inch apart, and in other words, a 1/4 inch from the center there. Okay. And I only have to mark one, and I usually mark the one that's lightest so I can see that the easiest. And speaking of seeing, I need to put on my stitchy readers so I can see when I'm sewing. You can pin these together if you want. I just feel like it's small enough that I can control it like this, and I don't want the pins to distort it. And so this way I don't have to follow the corners or anything because I've marked, and I just sew right on the lines. So these pieces are cut just a little bit bigger so that you can trim up after, and therefore you get really accurate pieces as well. So same thing, gonna set that. Grab my scissors and just cut it apart. And then this one I'm going to use, these are nice and cool. I'll just put these up here and see, even when you iron on these stickers, you can just peel them right off and it doesn't leave a residue at all. They're really nice. Sometimes you might want to keep them on there during the process, depending on what kind of block it is. If it's confusing or something, you might want to leave those stickers on there so that, it'll make sense to you when you're laying the block out. Okay, so I'm just going to, well, wait, I'm not going to open them up yet. I'm going to trim first. Again, you could open up, press it open, and then grab the ruler. This one we're doing is the 4-inch ruler, okay? So you could press it open, and then put your ruler on there, line up that center seam, and trim all the way around. But I just find it easier to do it this way. So I just do the same thing. I'm just setting it on here, and because we're doing 2 at a time, doing 1/2 inch apart, there is still some left over to trim off, but just not as much because we're doing 2 at the same time. But there's still plenty to trim off. And I just keep going around and trim off those little dog-eared corners. Okay. Then I'm going to go ahead and use the tip of my iron to press that open. Get it nice and warm. I'm going to use a clapper. That's all that I haven't used yet, so that I know that it's nice and cool. And then I'm going to do the other one. Line it right up on that seam. I like to use this little mat just so that I can turn it easily here without knocking anything out of the way. You know, if I'm using bigger segments, if I have bigger than this to trim, then I'll use my bigger one and I'll just clear my clappers off, you know, and then I'll have enough area to do that. Sorry for the noise. Okay, so when I'm pressing open, I usually just have to start getting it open, and then I can go along and use that tip of that iron and put that clapper on. So now we've got those two right there. Okay, so that's how I do it when I need two the same. So there's two different ways that you can do it if you just need one. Now we need one half square triangle with green in the background and one half square triangle with green in the pink background. Okay, and so I've already sewn what we need, but I just wanted to show you one way that you can do this, and then I'll show you the other way with the other one. So I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to turn this over and I'm going to mark. That way. Okay, I'm going to hurry and do the same thing. You'll know this method. You'll have this method down when we're finished with this. So what I'm doing here is, even though I only need one for the block, I'm sewing two. And so I'll have one half square triangle that's left over. And I just have an extra segment, and I could put it in my stash. I'm not going to go ahead and trim it. This is with the 4-inch everything. You know, I'm not going to go ahead and show you that because I've already sewn what I need right here. I just need this one. But I can either cut it in half right here, which is what I would do if I'm sewing two at the same time, and trim it up using the 4-inch trim it ruler. And the other half I would press and have an extra half square triangle that I could use with something, or I could actually trim it down to a size that I need to use it for something. Or usually what I do, you can do that if you have a lot, but what are you going to do with just one odd size? You can save those if you want and then piece them together as kind of potluck or leftover blocks. What I call leftovers is potluck blocks. But the other way is just what I'm going to show you this way. Is I just mark from one corner to corner instead of ½ inch apart. I just take my ruler and mark one line from corner to corner, or just sew it if it's small enough to fit on the seam. So easy. Okay, so then I'm just sewing down one side because I only need one. And then before pressing, I could do this after before cutting them apart, but I'm going to go ahead and then press this, open it up, trim it with that. Okay, and then I've got that one that I need that looks like this, and then I've got this leftover that I trimmed off, and I keep them together like this. And I'm going to use my other, not my trim ruler, because these are different because it has the 1/4 inch around it. I use my smaller rulers, and I will cut 2 squares, both of them at the same time, the biggest square that I can, either in 1½ 2 inches, or 2½, and I can get 2 inches out of these. And so that's what I do. To me, that's why I cut squares. They're more usable to me, and then I just put them in my stash. And, you know, I have a bunch of leftover squares and put them in my 2-inch scrappy basket, and I cannot cut 1.5-inch squares out of these. Now, another option is I could have just, instead of trimming that apart, I could have sewn that again and just get a smaller half square triangle to use in another scrappy project. I could also, instead of throwing these away, I could sew here and then trim up to 1.5 if I wanted to, and get half square triangles that way. But I have just, over the years, I have found that it's just much easier for me to trim them down into squares, and that's how I get my squares scrappy stash. And they're just leftovers anyway, and then I love making something out of my leftovers. And if you've seen any of my, you know, scrappy stash videos, you see the many, many quilts that I make that way. Okay, so that's the 2 different ways. You can either, you know, when you need a single one of something. If you need 2, you know, there's no waste. It's not a problem. You know, there's just a little bit of waste. But so that's the way I like to make half square triangles a lot. And you'll see that in my patterns a lot. And there's different reasons for different patterns at different times. And I like that because I'm showing you these different ways, you can decide what's best for you. There's enough fabric that I had you cut so that you can do it however you want it, you know, however which way you want to. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to sew these 4 blocks together. I'm going to begin to form the block. And so I'm going to turn that one that way. And so it's just a 4 patch in the center. Turn that one that way. And then I need the pink and green one right here. And turn it that way. Okay. So I'm going to sew these together. I always like to lay them out so that I know exactly which direction to sew and I'm not going to make a mistake. That doesn't mean I never make a mistake. We all do, but this really cuts down on the mistakes. And then I'm just using my 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you can pin if you'd like. I'm not a pinner unless it's in intersections. I'll probably pin when I go to sew these 2 rows together just to show you how I do that. But I wanted to show at least a few seams. I'm going to also sew the rest of the block off camera because it's just, you know, I'll lay it out and show you how I do it. But I don't want this, you know, this video doesn't need to be super duper long. Back. Okay, so I'll set my seams. In setting seams, I'm just squishing my threads together to make them flat, meaning the bobbin thread and the top thread. And this is where I like to use my my roller for sure. Okay, what did I do with it? There it is. Because I'm crossing over seams and I like to get that nice and flat and open before I press it and get the clapper on. So I'm pressing these seams open because I typically like to with my blocks anyway, to have them nice and flat and accurate. But especially since it's going to be applique, I do not want a bulky, super bulky block. And so I just always make that decision. If I'm going to applique a piece block, then I for sure press it open. And so then what I do is I'm just pressing these down. I know that they're open because I use my roller. There's no pleats in there. And I'm going to use, in fact, I'm going to pull this one down and use a separate clapper. And then I'll just put some extra weight on top of there with my extra clappers and let that cool down for just a minute. I'll put that there, and then what I'm going to do is start laying out. Let me grab this design board, and I'm going to start laying these out how we need it while those are cooling off. So I'm going to grab this one, this block right here. That's what this is right here. And I'm going to just lay these out. in the direction they need to be laid, and this block, the rest of the block after I get the center, is going to be sewn into this row, okay? And then this row goes like this. You know, I've got 2 extra because I showed you how to do 2 extra. Okay, then I'm going to sew these together. So basically I sew these together, then I'm going to add that on to that. And then when this 4 patch is finished, it'll go right there, and I can sew that block together, okay? So I'll show you that again as soon as this 4 patch is ready. It should be cooled off by now. And I'll show you how I pin these intersections. Okay, I can get that out of the way. All right, so I just look at the block again, make sure that I've got things set up how they need to be set up. So that goes across that way, and that goes across that way. See, I don't know what I did with my design board, but I typically always use this because I like how they don't slip off, and I can put them upright like this so I can compare that, okay? And so now I'm just going to fold that over there, and I know this is how I'm going to sew. So what I'm going to do is match these up and start sewing before I even pin, because I know that that's exactly where they need to start and to match up. I'm just following this red line right here, and then I start sewing, and the needle holds that down in there so I don't have to worry about it, and I'm going to match these up right here. I like to take my double pins right here, and I line up these seams. You can see on the side how they line up really easily, and I just push a pin in. I just poke it in there, okay, so that there's a pin on each side of that center seam, and so that is not going to shift. Now you can sew over these pins. If you don't have any of my double pins, you could use 2 pins if you want, 1 on each side, but you can sew over them if you want. You just do it slow at that point, and then I just match these up at the end, pushing or stretching, pulling, whatever I need to do to make sure they match up. If I need to fix that a little bit, these look like they're perfectly lined up, so I didn't have to do that. And then I just finish sewing that seam. And then once again, I come over here, set those seams, and see how that lines up there perfectly. And then I for sure am going to use this, especially in this intersection here. I like to really push that down with the flat seam roller. This is my quick press seam roller, and I used to just use wallpaper rollers. That's what it's of course modeled after, you know. And some of them are curved and some of them are flat. The curved ones are pastry rollers, and the flat ones are like wallpaper rollers, and I have found that the curved ones distort my blocks easier, and so I like the flat ones. Okay, so now I'm just doing that. Once again, I'm going to grab a clapper that I have not used so that I know it's nice and cool, and I'm just going to set that up there to cool. I'm going to bring this back in here. Okay, and this is what I've got left with my blocks. So I've got my block background. Remember how we're going to put it on this 4 patch? We're going to put the circle on the 4 patch. And so I'm just going to sew this together, you know, while we're off camera too, and I'm going to press the seams open. And these are cut 8 inches square. You just sew them together just like I showed you this 4 patch right here, and press the seams open and get that ready for the circle. After I've sewn this block together, here's the borders, and I just sew these onto the side and onto the top and bottom, okay, and press everything good, let it cool down, and then we'll go over to the table. But I want to show you, before we do that, how I mark my circles, okay, because I do these just a little bit differently, how I trace them. So here's the 14-inch square, I could have done this over to the work table so we weren't so squished, but I'm just going to go ahead and show you now. So I've got one 14-inch square. I did bring a longer ruler in too, and I'll show you why in a minute. And then I've got my 12-inch ruler. Okay, so let me just push that there. I'm going to put my clappers out of the way. This should be cool. Yeah, that's good. And so I'm just going to put this back over here. Sorry, Cass, I'm going back and forth, back and forth. See, I'm going to sew these 4 together and then sew them to the side of that block, and then that row sewn together will be the same measurement, and then I sew that together before I do the borders. But what I do with this circle is I just go ahead and take my pencil and trace around. I want to make sure that I see it. This is going to be our sewing line, okay? But notice how I've got these cross lines like this. This is going to help us if we mark those. So what I do is I'll just put a little outside line right here where I can see it when the ruler's still on there. Okay, now I'm finished with that ruler for right now, but this is where this longer ruler comes in. And I like to, it just helps me to have, I go all the way out. Let me shift this ruler down. So this ruler is my 3.5 by 14.5, so it's long enough to go over. But this is going to help when we're putting it on the quilt block before we sew it to kind of get it centered. And you'll see what I mean when we go over to the work table and we do that part. You know, and you'll never see these lines. These will be on the back side, but this will help you to, now you know exactly where your center is and center lines, and those quadrant lines are really going to help you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and sew this together, sew the borders on, and then I'll meet you back over to the work table and we're going to talk about turning it into a circle. Okay, so here is the block and it's got the borders on it. Here, let's bring it over here and I'll show you what the back looks like. So, of course, I showed you how I did that. Just sew those into rows. Everything's pressed open except I did not press open the borders because I felt like they would be flat pressing outside. And okay, so let me explain this. So what I usually do is I explain how I starch in my video and my Be Prepared. But what I do, you know, long story, maybe long, is I mix Mary Ellen's Best Press 50/50 with water in my spray bottle. But I always do that before I cut my fabric because I don't want to cut my block perfectly, spend all this time sewing, trimming accurately, doing everything, and then at the end, spray my block and press it to get it flat because it will just shrink your block. Because whenever you apply water or moisture of any kind to 100% cotton and then apply heat, it's going to shrink your block. But for these borders, for these blocks, it's an exception. I did not apply any water to the block itself, but I did to the borders, just a little bit. And when I say water, I just missed it a little bit right here because it doesn't matter. Remember, we're going to trim this all down anyway, so it doesn't matter as long as the block itself is intact and the points, you know, are good to go. So I hope that makes sense. So you could do that if you want to. I normally never do that, but because we're turning this into a circle and trimming some off, it doesn't matter if the outside's going to shrink a little teeny bit. Okay, I hope that makes sense. All right, so here's our block that we had to sew sideways, right, into rows. But the beauty of this turning into a circle means now some of these blocks that we have to sew sideways, like basket blocks and some flower blocks and things like that traditionally, can now be turned up when we go, you know, when we put it in the quilt because we've put a circle on it. So I'm going to show you how I line this up. So here's my circle. And what I'm going to do is, no matter how, you know, if I sew the circle this way, which is how I'm going to do it, it's not going to go like this. You can do it like this, but I'm using the lines. Hope this makes sense. I'm using the lines so that I can line up the center line with these right here. and line up the center with these points. So let's just grab some pins and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So this one particularly is going to go right inside the seam. So I'm going to put this line right on the circle, and I'm going to pin it right there, just inside that corner seam. When I say just inside the corner seam there, and I'm going to do the same thing here. And then I'll know it's centered that way. And then I know it's centered here because I have something on this block. All the blocks are going to have something to line up with. Now, when I did that, you can see that that line lined up with this mark right here. So now you've got that. So don't worry that this looks like this. Remember, we're just going to sew this. The block needs to be face up, and your marking line on your sewing interfacing needs to be face up. And this is sewing interfacing, and this is the thickness that I developed specifically for my Sew Simple shapes and my circle rulers. And now I can go ahead, while that's pinned into the design board so that I know that's where I want it, I'm going to go ahead and just pin around this circle because I don't want it, you know, to go another way or to shift. And then I'm simply going to sew onto the circle, but I think I'm going to put one pin right here in the middle. And then I'll go ahead and take this remaining pin out and just pin it on the outside. And all I'm going to do is ignore these lines. These are not sewing lines, they're just marking, and I'm going to sew all the way around on this circle, okay? And I shorten the length. So normally to stitch, I do it on a 12, which is obviously on a featherweight. It's, well, on any machine, but every machine is different. If it's digital or computerized or whatever, it might show you the markings different, but this is how it is on a featherweight. 12 means, you know, 12 stitches per inch, 8 per inch or whatever. But so that's normally what I do, either 10 or 12 when I'm piecing, but I'm going to go up to about like an 18, just do a little bit smaller stitch. I'm just going to take this off so it doesn't get in the way. And now that this is pinned, I'm going to make sure it lies flat, and I'm just going to start right there on the line. And I am not going to back stitch. I'm just going to keep sewing right on this circle. And I'm going to put on my readers. I'm going to turn my, normally I have this light off because it glares funny when filming, but I hope you guys can bear with me with that light on them. That's not too bad because I want to see exactly where I'm sewing. This is the same way that I sew my Sew Simple shapes. I use an open-toed foot so I can see exactly where my needle is going into, you know, into through there. I pick up just to make sure, because this is pieced. I'm picking up just to make sure that these seams are lying flat and they haven't flipped as I've been turning it. And that helps. If I keep my hand here, I can kind of feel if there's a bump or something going on. And I just simply sew around the circle. I'm getting to a part in the corners where there's seams, just making sure it's flat. Making sure nothing's catching on anything. So this is exactly, again, how I do my Sew Simple shapes, whether it's a 2-inch circle or a 12-inch circle, or any shape like a leaf or a flower or anything. I just simply sew right exactly on the line. And then I'm going to have a perfect circle because I used my circle ruler to mark perfect. And now I'm getting around to where I started, and I'm going to over sew, meaning I'm going to sew where I already started by about 1 inch, and that locks those stitches into place instead of back stitching and adding that bulk. Okay, and that's all I do there. I'm going to take these pins out real quick. And then I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut an approximate 1/4 inch. Okay, so I don't want to cut into that circle. Just going to be careful. And this is exactly, once again, what I do with my So Simple shapes. And of course we had to add borders onto these blocks to make it big enough so that the block floats inside. Okay, and then I've got this left over, and I bet you'll guess what I'll do with these, right? I'm going to cut these 4 corners into squares. All right. Okay, so now let's bring this over here.
You're still attached by that
thread.
Yeah,
I am attached. I'm like, what's happening? Okay, so now let's bring this over here. And this is what I do with my So Simple shapes. I'm going to cut an X here in the interfacing only. Okay, not in the block. I want to keep that intact, obviously. But I'm going to just pull this apart. And it doesn't have to be an exact X, but you could. Usually I take my seam ripper and just start like a little hole right there, so that I can take my scissors. And I usually do not use my bigger scissors because they have a long blade and I don't want to accidentally get into that block on accident, but I just make sure. And these are just like my medium-sized blades that I like to use, and I just cut into there so that I can turn. Now, let me say, some people have asked me, why don't I cut an X first before I sew the shape? Well, look what happens when you cut an X. That could be pulled and distorted. I don't want to do that. I like to cut the X after for turning so that this stays strong and as one piece and intact, so I'm not pulling and misshaping the shape as I'm sewing. And then I simply just turn it right side out. Okay, I always feel like when I'm doing circles, I always feel like I'm making a pizza like this. And I just push it out like that as much as I can. And then this is where this clover point-to-point turner comes in, and I keep, let's bring this over here. Maybe I'll turn this off so it's not so glary. And I have my interfacing towards me, and I'm just pushing out ever so slightly and slowly. And yes, I am pushing, but just on the cotton fabric, not on the interfacing, just in front. And as I go along, I'm kind of squishing those together because cotton has a memory and it will keep that shape. I'm still going to press it. When I get to the seam areas, I'm going to kind of push out, but don't push out too hard because you don't want to, you know, poke through your fabric. But it just helps to push that cotton out because you want that to be the same size circle that you traced. And you don't want to make it smaller and get little puckers in it and things like that because you haven't pushed it out into its proper shape. So we're almost getting there. Okay, and then sometimes I will just go around like this, make sure the edge is like that, okay? And then I'm not going to iron, I'm just going to press on those edges. And a lot of times, in fact on this circle, I would do this on those edges first just to make sure. And again, you know, I'm talking about a pastry roller or a wallpaper. You can go from the inside out and kind of make sure that those edges are where you want them to be. Now I'm going to press again just to get those warm, because if this is warm and pressed down, then those clappers are really going to work. And then I'm just going to bring some clappers over and get all the edges. And this, because of the heat from the iron, that is going to, this wood is going to pull out that heat. And because of the weight of the wood, it's going to be flat, okay? So I'm gonna let this cool for probably just 2 or 3 minutes. And then I did sew this right here, okay, the background. And I just pressed it open again. And then we're gonna go over to the table now. I know I spoke too soon before. I forgot when I said we were going to go over to the table next that I hadn't shown you how to sew the circle. So now we're going to go over to the table, and I'm going to show you how I glue base this and prepare for applique. Okay, we've got pins and we've got Sue glue and we've got design boards, and here's our circle. And see, because of the lines here, we can tell how it's centered right here. But because this is a 4-patch, look, it's going to mimic these same lines right here. So the reason I'm showing that is that's how we'll know how to lay this on and center it. And so you can see that there's a little bit of a seam opening here. Okay, how do I say that? Not an opening of the seam, but where it didn't go all the way to the corner of the seam. That's how it's going to look. And you want to put that center seam lined up with those this way and then this way. And then you'll know that you're as centered in the block as you possibly can be. Okay, and so that's how you want it to look. And so what I do then is I just grab some pins and put that around the edges, and really all I need is 4 at this point. And I grab this Sue glue, and a dot is a lot, and I'm just going in about a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch. I don't want to go all the way to the edge. You can needle through the glue. I just don't want to have to. And so I just don't glue all the way to the edge. But sometimes when I'm doing So Simple shapes and they're small, you have to go a little bit closer to the edges because they're smaller pieces. But as a rule, when I don't have to. And so when it's a big circle like this, you know, I don't know, 1 inch apart, 3/4 of an inch apart, it's really just replacing a pin. Every dot of this glue is just kind of replacing where you might put a pin if you wanted to pin it really good. Okay. All right, and then once that glue is on, let me stick the lid on. Once that glue is on, then I will go ahead and pin at the edges right here. And then that will help that adhere, you know, the sewing interfacing will adhere to that glue. And it usually takes, I don't know, 10 minutes or so to dry. You can let it dry overnight if you want, but I find it's easier to pull the pins out if they've gone right through the glue if you don't let it dry overnight. But you can still pull the pins out, but I just find it easier. I'm going to pull these in here closer. And then that's how you glue baste. You could pin if you wanted to, but I don't like to pin if I'm gonna hand applique. I don't want to, you know, have to scrunch it up like you do when you're hand appliquing to do your stitches around the edges, and a pin's gonna poke into the palm of your hand. And so that's why I like to use this Sue glue for basting. And you know, you can lift this off. You can peel it off if you found out you didn't get it centered or something like that. But anyway, so I just let that sit right there for a few minutes. And so while that is drying, let's talk about the applique. So there's a few ways that you can applique this. You can hand applique it, the circle, onto the background, or you can machine applique. And there's also 2 ways that you can hand applique it. You can do the traditional needle turn stitch and match the thread to the applique itself. That's what I always do, is match the thread to the applique, not the background, but the applique. And you can just do that, and that is kind of invisible and you can't see that. But it also, you have an opportunity, because this is a circle and this is on fabric and this is on background. I mean, of course it's on fabric, but I mean, it's on multiple fabric and this is on background. It might be really cute if you wanted to do it by hand and do the buttonhole stitch with colored thread. So you could pick any of the colors of thread that is in here, and you could do the buttonhole stitch, and I think that would be really fun by hand. Okay, so here's my newest thread collection through Aurifil. If you followed me for a long time, you know that I've used Aurifil exclusively for a long time. And these are my new colors. These are all new and different colors that are from in my other sets, but they match all my fabrics. And so if you were going to hand applique and just match this, doing the needle turn stitch, I would either use this thread or this thread, you know, just something neutral, okay? These are 80 weight cotton with the wooden spools, and these are 50 weight They both work for applique. Okay, I would use them both, either by hand or by machine. Both will go through your machine. So the 80 weight is just a little bit thinner. So if I was going to do it by hand and I wanted to do an invisible stitch, I would probably, oh, I could still pick both because these are both the 80 weight. Okay, so either one. But if I was going to do a buttonhole stitch, I would probably pick one of these colors in the orange, and I would use 2 strands. I would just put 2 strands on my needle and do the buttonhole stitch and do a really fun little pretty accent of a buttonhole stitch. Okay. Now, by machine, you can just do a little tiny zigzag, like an invisible stitch, and it just zigzags from one side to the other. And I've talked about this and shown you how I've done this, both the hand stitch and the applique, on my channel here on a video, so I will link to that if you want to watch how I do that. But you can do a little zigzag, or you could just do a straight stitch. That's another way that you could machine stitch it, meaning you could just edge stitch it kind of like a top stitch, and I would just use the off-white thread to match the background again, and you can just edge it, and that would zip right around, and I would just back stitch a little bit where you stopped and started. I would probably do that on a seam so it's not so noticeable, and you could just whip around that, and that would be super easy. But also you can use a fancy stitch on your machine, and once again use colored thread if you wanted to, and do whatever you wanted to do. You could, if you have a machine that does a buttonhole stitch, I have a Bernina that does a buttonhole stitch, and I like to do that sometimes. That would be really fun. Like on this one, maybe I would pick the green or the teal or something. So, you know, this thread color right here might be really fun, but because of this green here, maybe I would tend to use more of a green, and that would show, or I could use the pink, and that would be really cute buttonhole stitch, or any fancy little stitch that you want to do. And so if you want to test that out, just do a little circle with some leftover background and get some leftover background, do a little circle on there and test it out before you do it on your block. Okay, so that's what I do to applique. Now, once I'm finished with the applique, I'm going to take these pins out so I can show you this step. And of course I do take the pins out before I applique, just like I said. That's why I use the glue. I like how portable it is. Usually I leave all of the blocks at the same time to applique, and I'll just put them on 2 design boards and sandwich them within that design board. Put a lid on it with, you know, when I say a lid, the other large design board, I would put the lid on and put a rubber band around them to become portable, and I don't ever have to worry about my blocks getting wrinkled or anything, and they're just ready to go when I'm ready to applique. So once we're done with this, we have cut these just a little bit larger, because when you're appliquing, whether it's by hand or by machine, you know, these edges could become frayed or whatever, you know, from use. Who knows how long it's going to take you to applique, or if you're going to do it right away, or if they're going to sit. But I just like always to do my backgrounds just a little bit bigger. And then I bring in the trim it ruler, and we're going to trim it down after applique, and we're going to use the lines on this ruler to line up with the intersections on this block right here. Let me move it off the mat because you won't need the design board. And let me move this up. Can you see that whole thing, Cass?
Just a tiny bit more up.
Towards you. There you go.
That's better.
Okay, thanks. All right, so now I'm going to line up these lines right here with the center. And then I'm not going to do it now because obviously I have not appliqued yet, but I just take my rotary cutter and I just hold my arm down on here. This is all non-slip, but I hold my arm down and I cut here and I cut here. And then I know that these 2 edges are correct, and I flip it around and line it back up again, you know, just to make sure. But I know that I've already cut these, so these should be on the edge of the fabric. And then I go ahead and cut this and cut this, and it is all ready to sew into the quilt at that point. And you've got nice clean edges, everything's appliqued, nothing's distorted. And that's how to do block 1. I'm so excited to do this quilt with you guys. I'm really excited to do all of the different blocks. I really enjoy doing, you know, different blocks. So it's just like a new little project within itself. And speaking of that, any of these blocks would be so cute and just a pillow. Or you could pick, you know, some of your favorite ones and do a runner, a single runner, or do a wall hanging that goes this way, a runner, or whatever you wanted to do. I just think these blocks are really versatile. And let's see. So on Friday, meet me on my blog, and I'll be showing you how to do block 2, now that you kind of know how I'm sewing these blocks together. And of course, all the cutting is in the guide. Everything that you need to know is in the guide. Everything else that you need to know is in my Be Prepared post that I will link to. So once again, be sure that you read the entire description of this video. You'll have to click on it to read the entire thing, and so that you can see all of the links that are necessary to the sew along. So I hope you're as excited as I am. Please leave me a comment on this video and let me know if you're doing the sew along, if you like this video, just whatever you need to know. Ask me some questions that I haven't covered. I've tried to be as thorough as I possibly can, but sometimes I might leave something out that is not, that, you know, maybe you haven't read the guide or you didn't read my Be Prepared post or something like that, but I will try to answer as best as I can. And thank you once again for joining me in my sewing room. It's always fun to have you here, and I'll chat with you later.